Get out of my country and never come back. These were the words that shattered decades of corporate exploitation in Africa. Ibrahim Traore stood face-to-face with Gary Nagle, the director of the Swiss mining giant Glencore, and deliver a verdict that would dismantle the company that had plundered $800 million from the continent. Nagle's face shifted from smug assurance to stunned disbelief in mere seconds. The director had entered the presidential palace in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso, expecting another routine negotiation, only to find himself surrounded by armed guards, enraged ministers, and stacks of evidence documenting years of theft, devastation, and loss of life. "You thought this day would never come," Traoré said, his voice slicing through the heavy air like a sharpened blade. "You thought you could poison our children, steal our wealth, and ruin our land forever. You were wrong, Mr. Nagle. Your reign of destruction ends now." The cameras were rolling. Every major African news outlet had been discreetly invited to witness the moment. International journalists watched via live feeds, their eyes fixed on the unraveling of one of the world's most powerful corporations at the hands of a young military captain who had decided enough was enough. Behind Traoré, massive screens illuminated the room with undeniable proof. Satellite images revealed illegal mining operations never reported to the government. Photographs showed children suffering from contaminated water near Glencore's mines. Bank statements exposed millions funneled into offshore accounts. Secret recordings captured Glencore executives mocking African leaders, calling them puppets, and boasting about their ease of manipulation. "Let me show you what decades of Glencore's work looks like," Traoré said, his tone steady but laced with righteous anger. He clicked through image after image. "This is Amina, age 6, dead from leukemia caused by your toxic waste. This is a village abandoned because your operations turned their river into poison. This is a crater where fertile fields once stood. These are the true costs of your profits, Mr. Nagle." Nagle opened his mouth to respond, reaching for the polished deflections that had served him for years, but Traoré cut him off. "Your lawyers can't save you. Your threats are meaningless here. Your bribes are worthless. You have ravaged Africa for too long. But it ends today, not tomorrow, not next year, today." The evidence was overwhelming. Internal Glencore documents revealed the company knew its operations were deadly, but deemed it more cost-effective to pay minimal reparations than to invest in safety. One chilling spreadsheet, labeled African Casualty Estimates, calculated the number of deaths expected annually from their activities and the paltry compensation required. "You want to know the true brilliance of your cruelty?" Traoré continued, his voice thick with disgust. "You didn't just rob us. You made us thank you for it. You paid our official scraps while siphoning millions. You built a single clinic while poisoning entire regions. You donated to charities with the very wealth you stole from the people those charities claimed to serve. You turned us into beggars in our own homeland, grateful for crumbs from our own table." The ministers seated around the table no longer concealed their fury. Many had watched their communities crumble under Glencore's operations. They had buried loved ones who succumbed to preventable illnesses while the company extracted enough wealth to fund entire nations. For years, they had been silenced by a system that prioritized foreign corporations over African lives. But now, their president was voicing the truths they had been forbidden to speak. Traoré displayed financial records obtained from whistleblowers within Glencore. The documents exposed the staggering scale of the theft. In Burkina Faso alone, Glencore had extracted minerals worth $320 million over 2 decades, yet declared profits of less than $40 million. The rest had vanished through shell companies, transfer pricing, and accounting tricks that would shame any honest enterprise. $320 million, Traoré repeated, his eyes locked on Nagle. "Do you know what we could have built with that? Every citizen in Burkina Faso could have had access to healthcare, education, clean water, and modern infrastructure. We could have eradicated poverty. Instead, that money bought private jets for your executives, estates for your shareholders, and influence over politicians in your pocket. The most damning evidence came from Glencore's own servers, legally accessed by a cyber team Traore had commissioned during a security audit. The files revealed a chilling reality. Glencore maintained detailed dossiers on every African leader, cataloging their weaknesses, vices, and the price of their loyalty. A dedicated department orchestrated bribes and blackmail to ensure compliance. "This is my favorite find," Traoré said, his voice dripping with bitter sarcasm. "Your company's African strategy plan. Let me share some highlights. Target emerging leaders before they develop integrity. Exploit ethnic tensions to prevent organized resistance. Maintain poverty to ensure desperation and compliance. Prevent local processing of resources at all costs." These are your words, Mr. Nagle. This is your business model. Nagle's lawyers whispered urgently, but they knew the battle was lost. Everything Traoré presented was true, backed by irrefutable evidence. The arrogance that had carried Nagle through years of exploiting Africa was collapsing. He was being exposed not as a shrewd businessman, but as the architect of calculated crimes against humanity. Then came the revelation that stunned even the most seasoned ministers. Traoré projected medical records from regions surrounding Glencore's mines. Cancer rates soared 500% above normal. Birth defects appeared that baffled doctors. Water sources were poisoned for generations. Glencore had conducted its own studies and knew the consequences, but determined that African lives were worth less than the cost of safety measures. "You have a formula," Traoré said, his voice trembling with barely contained rage. "A mathematical equation for how many African deaths are acceptable for each million in profit. You killed thousands and called it the cost of doing business. Well, Mr. Nagle, today you learn the true cost." Traoré rose from his seat and approached Nagle, slamming a document onto the table. "This is your eviction notice. Every Glencore operation in Burkina Faso now belongs to the people. Every mine, every vehicle, every scrap of paper. Your bank accounts are frozen. Your assets are seized. Your executives have 24 hours to leave, or they will face arrest for crimes against humanity." Nagle, his face pale, stammered, "This is illegal. You can't do this. We have contracts. International law will protect us. You'll be sued into ruin." Traoré's laugh was cold, devoid of humor. "Sue us with what authority? The same courts that ignored our children's deaths? The same laws that shielded your theft for decades? No, Mr. Nagle, we recognize no authority that values profits over African lives. Your contracts were signed with corrupt officials and paid for with blood. They are worthless." Security guards stepped forward as Nagle stood, his tailored suit now damp with sweat. But Traoré had one final blow. Before 24 hours after the confrontation that shook the continent, Glencore's evacuation from Burkina Faso was in chaos. Executives who had lived like royalty in fortified estates scrambled to book flights out of Ouagadougou. Military units stood guard at every Glencore facility, securing documents to prevent shredding or theft. Heavy machinery, once used to strip the land, was inventoried for the people's use. At the mines, workers who had endured years of brutal conditions gathered in disbelief, their faces a mix of exhaustion and cautious hope. For the first time, they saw a future where their labor might serve their own nation. Ibrahim Traoré wasted no time. He drove to the heart of Glencore's largest operation, a sprawling gold mine that had scarred the landscape for decades. Thousands of workers, their clothes worn and hands calloused, gathered under the blazing sun. Traoré stood on a makeshift platform, his military uniform crisp but his expression warm. "Your days of exploitation are over," he declared, his voice carrying over the crowd. "From this moment, you work for Burkina Faso, not Switzerland. Your children will benefit from the wealth you extract. Your communities will be rebuilt with the resources beneath your feet." The response was a roar that echoed across the dusty plain. Workers who had been paid pennies while producing millions in gold raised their fists. Traore outlined immediate changes. Salaries would triple overnight. Safety equipment Glencore had deemed too costly would be provided, and plans for local processing plants were already in motion. These facilities would transform raw minerals into finished products, creating thousands of jobs and keeping wealth in Burkina Faso. "This is your mine now," he said. "This is your country. This is your future." Back in the capital, the fallout from the confrontation rippled outward. The evidence Traore had shared with other African nations sparked a firestorm. In Ghana, protests erupted outside Glencore's offices as citizens demanded accountability. Nigeria's government seized company assets, citing gross violations of national interest. South Africa's Judicial Commission began summoning Glencore executives, while the Democratic Republic of Congo declared all company operations halted until a full audit was complete. Zambia and Tanzania followed, announcing reviews of every foreign mining contract. The continent was awakening, united by a shared realization. They had been looted for too long. Traore's strategy was meticulous. He had anticipated Glencore's retaliation, lawsuits, diplomatic pressure, media campaigns. But he was ready. His legal team, a coalition of battle-hardened attorneys from Brazil, India, and China, was already filing counterclaims in international courts. They argued that Glencore's contracts were void, signed under coercion, or with corrupt officials who betrayed their people. The evidence, dossiers, recordings, financial records, was bulletproof. "Let them sue," Traore told his advisors. "Every courtroom they enter will become a stage for their crimes." Meanwhile, Traore's economic vision took shape. The state-owned enterprises he had courted, partners from nations that respected resource sovereignty, began arriving. Engineers from a Brazilian mining cooperative assessed Glencore's abandoned sites, proposing sustainable extraction methods. Chinese firms offered to build processing plants, training locals to operate them. Indian companies pledged to buy minerals at fair prices, with contracts that prioritized Burkina Faso's development. These were not charity deals, but partnerships built on mutual respect and shared prosperity. Glencore's chokehold on the industry was breaking, replaced by a model that empowered the nation. The international reaction was polarized but predictable. Western governments issued stern statements, warning of economic instability and disrespect for international law. Corporate media painted Traore as a reckless firebrand, a dictator in military fatigues. The World Bank and IMF hinted at sanctions, citing concerns over investor confidence. But the tide was shifting. Environmental groups, long silenced by corporate lobbying, praised Burkina Faso's courage. Human rights organizations released their own reports, corroborating Traore's evidence with accounts of Glencore's abuses in Zambia, Congo, and beyond. Even some Western scholars, risking their careers, admitted the reckoning was overdue. "Africa has been bled dry," one Oxford professor wrote. Traore is doing what should have been done decades ago. The evidence Traore released ignited investigations far beyond Africa. In Peru, prosecutors reopened cases tied to Glencore's copper mines, citing environmental devastation. Colombia's government questioned the company's coal operations, while Kazakhstan demanded transparency on oil deals. Glencore, once a titan, was now a pariah, its name synonymous with exploitation. Its stock price, already in freefall, shed billions more as investors fled. Boardrooms in Zurich buzzed with panic, but no amount of spin could undo the damage. The truth was out, and it was spreading. Traore's most powerful moment came in a village ravaged by Glencore's operations. The water was murky, the soil barren, the children frail from years of exposure to toxins. He arrived not with empty promises, but with action. Engineers drilled new wells to access clean water. Medical teams set up mobile clinics, treating illnesses Glencore had ignored. Construction crews broke ground on a hospital, funded by seized assets. Standing among the villagers, Traore spoke softly but firmly. "This is what $800 million stolen looks like," he said, gesturing to the desolate landscape. But this is also where the healing begins. Your pain exposed the criminals. It united our continent. It ended an era of silence. Today, we start building what they tried to destroy. The villagers, hardened by years of neglect, wept. For the first time, they saw a leader who didn't just speak, but acted. A woman, her hands trembling, approached Traoré and handed him a photograph of her son, lost to a disease linked to Glencore's pollution. "Will this bring him back?" she asked, her voice breaking. Traoré took the photo, his eyes steady. "Nothing can undo your loss," he said. "But I promise you, his death will not be in vain. We will build a future where no mother loses her child to greed." The legal battles intensified. Glencore hired top-tier law firms, filing suits in London, New York, and The Hague, claiming Burkina Faso's actions violated international trade agreements. They leaned on Western governments, urging diplomatic pressure. But Traoré's team was relentless. They countersued, accusing Glencore of crimes against humanity and environmental terrorism. They presented evidence to the United Nations, demanding accountability for corporate violations of human rights. The Brazilian lawyers cited precedents from their victories against oil giants. The Indian advocates invoked cases where pesticide companies were held liable for poisoning communities. The Chinese experts crafted arguments rooted in sovereignty, arguing that no nation should be forced to honor contracts that destroy its people. Public sentiment in Burkina Faso was electric. Markets buzzed with talk of the new era. Young people, once resigned to emigration, began studying mining engineering, environmental science, and law, inspired by Traoré's vision. Community leaders formed oversight committees, ensuring mines served the public good. Transparency became the cornerstone. Every contract was published online, every revenue stream tracked in real time. What had been hidden was now open. What had been stolen was now shared. Glencore's evacuation left behind more than abandoned equipment. Workers uncovered warehouses of documents the company had failed to destroy, more proof of corruption, tax evasion, and environmental negligence. Traoré's cyber team digitized the files, sharing them with allied nations. The revelations fueled a broader movement. In Tanzania, the government seized idle mining concessions held by speculators. Zambia mandated local processing of copper, creating thousands of jobs. Ghana hiked mining royalties, redirecting funds to healthcare and education. The Democratic Republic of Congo canceled exploitative contracts, retendering them to companies willing to invest in the country's future. The old race to the bottom, where nations competed to offer the cheapest terms to foreign corporations, was unraveling. African leaders, inspired by Traoré, began to coordinate. They shared strategies, legal frameworks, and intelligence, forming a united front against exploitation. The message was clear: Africa's resources would no longer be plundered. Environmental destruction would have consequences. Corporate executives could face personal liability. The rules written by and for corporations were being rewritten. In Ouagadougou, the transformation was tangible. Mining revenues, once siphoned offshore, now funded schools with modern equipment, hospitals with trained staff, and roads connecting rural communities to markets. Clean water systems, long denied, began to flow. Workers at the nationalized mines received training, protective gear, and wages that allowed them to live with dignity. Local processing plants, funded by seized Glencore assets, broke ground, promising to turn raw minerals into products that could compete globally. The wealth that had built foreign empires was finally staying home. Gary Nagle's fall was stark. Once a titan who dined with presidents, he was now a liability. Glencore distanced itself, issuing statements claiming he acted independently. But the evidence Traoré released, emails, recordings, strategy memos, tied Nagle directly to the company's crimes. His name became a cautionary tale, taught in African schools as a symbol of corporate greed. In a rare interview, Nagle tried to defend himself, claiming Glencore had driven development. But the images of poisoned rivers and sick children drowned out his words. Even he seemed to doubt them. For Traoré, the fight was far from over. Glencore was one company among many, a symptom of a larger system that had bled Africa dry. But the victory had shifted something fundamental. Fear, the weapon corporations had wielded for decades, was gone. In its place was resolve, a continent-wide determination to reclaim what was stolen. Traoré knew the legal and diplomatic battles would rage for years, but he had ignited a spark. The people had seen power confronted and defeated. They had seen the untouchable brought low. As night fell over Ouagadougou, Traoré stood on the balcony of the presidential palace, looking out at a city alive with possibility. The revolution he had started was spreading, not just in Burkina Faso, but across borders, across generations. The looters had been warned. The complicit had been exposed. The people were awakening, and there was no turning back. Months after Ibrahim Traoré's confrontation with Nagle and the expulsion of Glencore from Burkina Faso, the transformation was undeniable. The nation's mining sector, once a pipeline for foreign wealth, was now a cornerstone of development. Revenues had surged by 800%, pouring into public services that had been starved for decades. Schools with laboratories and computers sprouted in rural areas. Hospitals, equipped with modern tools and staffed by trained doctors, treated communities ravaged by years of neglect. Roads connected isolated villages to markets, and clean water systems replaced the poisoned wells Glencore had left behind. Local processing plants, funded by seized assets, were operational, turning raw minerals into finished goods and creating thousands of jobs. The wealth that had once built mansions in Switzerland was rebuilding Burkina Faso. But Traoré's vision extended beyond his borders. The evidence he had shared with other African nations had sparked a continental uprising. In Tanzania, nationalized mining concessions were now managed by local cooperatives, employing workers at fair wages. Zambia's copper processing plants, inspired by Burkina Faso's model, were generating jobs and revenue. Ghana's increased mining royalties funded free education programs, while the Democratic Republic of Congo's new contracts with ethical partners prioritized technology transfer and environmental protection. The race to the bottom, where nations undercut each other to attract foreign corporations, was over. In its place was a race to the top, with African countries demanding fair deals, local investment, and accountability. Traoré institutionalized the revolution to ensure it endured. He established citizen oversight committees for every mine, composed of local leaders, workers, and environmental experts. Every contract was published online, accessible to all. Revenue figures were updated in real time, displayed on public dashboards in every major city. Independent environmental monitoring teams, equipped with cutting-edge technology, tracked water and soil quality near mining sites. What had been shrouded in secrecy was now transparent. What had been stolen was now shared. What had been destroyed was being restored. The psychological shift was as profound as the economic one. Young people, once resigned to leaving Africa for opportunity, now saw a future at home. Universities reported surges in applications for mining engineering, environmental science, and law. Entrepreneurs launched startups to process minerals locally, from gold jewelry to industrial components. Communities, long silenced, organized to demand their rights, holding leaders accountable. The spark Traoré had ignited was becoming a fire, fueled by a generation that believed change was possible. Internationally, Glencore's collapse sent shockwaves through corporate boardrooms. The company's stock, once a darling of investors, was now a cautionary tale. Legal battles raged, but Traoré's coalition of lawyers from Brazil, India, and China outmaneuvered Glencore's high-priced firms. In international courts, they argued that contracts signed under duress or with corrupt officials were invalid. They filed claims for reparations, citing decades of environmental damage and human rights violations. The United Nations began discussing a framework to hold corporations accountable for cross-border crimes, with Burkina Faso's evidence as a cornerstone. Glencore's attempts to rally Western governments faltered as public opinion turned. Activists in Europe and North America protested outside the company's offices, brandishing images of poisoned African children and ruined landscapes. Gary Nagle's downfall was complete. Once a power broker who shaped national policies, he was now unemployable. His name is synonym for corporate greed. His attempts to salvage his reputation, an interview here, a press release there, fell flat. The world had seen the evidence. Emails he signed, strategies he approved, lives he deemed expendable. In African schools, his story was taught as a warning, alongside lessons on sovereignty and justice. Glencore itself teetered on the brink, its operations curtailed not just in Africa, but globally. Peru's investigations into its copper mines gained traction. Colombia's coal inquiries intensified. Kazakhstan's oil deals faced scrutiny. The company that had seemed untouchable was crumbling under the weight of its own crimes. Traore's message to other corporations was uncompromising. "You are not welcome here unless you come as partners, not predators," he declared in a televised address to the African Union. "We will not accept crumbs from our own table. We will not watch our children die for your profits. We will not stay poor while you grow rich from our resources." Those days are gone forever. The speech, broadcast across the continent, became a rallying cry. Leaders who had once bowed to corporate pressure now faced demand from their people to follow Burkina Faso's lead. Those who resisted were exposed, their ties to foreign companies laid bare by the same transparency Traoré championed. The economic impact was staggering. Economists later estimated that Glencore's model of exploitation had cost Africa over $8 billion, enough to eradicate poverty, build world-class infrastructure, and educate every child. That wealth had fueled the prosperity of nations that lectured Africa on development while ignoring their complicity. But now, the tide was turning. Mining revenues across the continent were redirected to healthcare, education, and clean energy. Environmental restoration projects, funded by seized assets, employed thousands, from engineers to laborers. Local industries flourished, creating value chains that had been deliberately suppressed. The brain drain reversed as diaspora Africans returned, drawn by the promise of a new era. Western governments and corporations, initially defiant, began to adapt. The old model, exploiting Africa's resources with minimal accountability, was dead. Countries seeking access to the continent's minerals now offered fair partnerships, technology transfers, and local employment. Those who refused were locked out of the world's fastest-growing markets. Traoré's courage had shifted the balance of power, proving that Africa could dictate its own terms. The most enduring moment came when Traoré returned to the village he had visited months earlier, where Glencore's pollution had left only despair. The transformation was striking. Clean water flowed from new wells. A hospital, fully staffed, treated patients free of charge. Fields, once barren, were being restored by agronomists trained in soil recovery. Children played, their laughter a stark contrast to the silence of sickness. Traoré knelt beside an elder, who handed him a small, hand-carved wooden figure, a symbol of gratitude. "You gave us back our home," the elder said, tears in his eyes. Traoré, his voice steady, replied, "This is only the beginning. Your home is yours forever now." Historians would later mark this as a turning point, not just for Burkina Faso, but for the continent. It wasn't only about mining or money. It was about power. For too long, power had flowed from the global north to the south, from corporations to nations, from the few to the many. Traoré reversed that flow. His courage inspired teachers to challenge corrupt education officials, doctors to confront pharmaceutical giants, and farmers to reject exploitative seed companies. The example had been set. Power could be confronted, defeated, and reclaimed. The numbers told the story. $800 million stolen by one company. Thousands dead from preventable poisoning. Ecosystems destroyed for profit. But also, an 800% increase in government revenues. Thousands of jobs created, hundreds of communities rebuilt. The mathematics of exploitation had been replaced by the mathematics of justice. The Glencore era ended with a roar of a continent finding its voice, a roar of people reclaiming their wealth, of leaders choosing service over submission, of a future no longer dictated by the past. Across Africa, the day Traoré expelled Nagle became a symbol, celebrated as Economic Independence Day. The footage of Nagle's humiliation, stumbling out of the presidential palace, clutching worthless contracts, played on televisions continent-wide, a reminder that the mighty could fall. But Traoré always emphasized that this was just the start. Glencore was one battle in a larger war against a system that had looted Africa for centuries. The fight for true sovereignty would take generations, but the fear that had paralyzed the continent was gone. In villages where Glencore and its ilk had once reigned, hope mingled with resolve. People had seen their leader stand up to power and win. They had seen the untouchable brought low, the invincible defeated. If Burkina Faso could do it, so could they. The spark had spread, igniting movements from Accra to Addis Ababa. The message was clear. Africa's resources would no longer subsidize foreign prosperity. African lives were not disposable. Leaders who served corporate interests would be exposed and replaced. For Traoré, the victory was not personal. It was about proving that Africa could defend itself, that its resources could serve its people, that its leaders could be incorruptible. The revolution he started was accelerating. Mining communities saw schools, hospitals, and roads for the first time. Youth who had known only despair now dreamed of building their nations. The continent that had been looted for centuries was saying, with one voice, enough. The looters had been warned. The complicit had been exposed. The people had awakened. It began with two words, "Get out," spoken by a leader who dared to act when others had faltered. Those words carried the weight of a continent's pain and the promise of its future. The revolution had begun, and there was no turning back.